I am Thomas, and I am 34 years old. For exactly 18 years, I functioned as the silent, reliable bank account for my family, funding their comfortable lives while they treated me like an outsider in my own childhood home. Picture this scenario. We were sitting at the large mahogany dining room table, the exact same table I had purchased for them 3 years prior when my mother complained her old one was looking dated. The rich, savory smell of my mother's famous chicken lasagna filled the air. And right there, in the middle of a completely ordinary Friday evening, my parents looked me dead in the eye and casually stated that they had decided to leave the entire family inheritance, both the primary house and the vacation cabin, exclusively to my younger brother Julian. They told me I was simply too independent and that I did not need their help. They handed over my rightful legacy to a 30-year-old man who still brought his dirty laundry home on weekends. But there was one massive piece of information they did not know. They had no idea that my patience possessed a hard limit, and they certainly did not know that I held the legal and financial power to completely pull the rug out from under their perfect, entitled little lives. And right now, they are packing their personal belongings into cheap cardboard boxes, desperately begging me for a second chance. Before I tell you exactly how I turned their ultimate betrayal into the greatest real estate victory of my life, hit that like button if you believe in absolute, uncompromising justice. And please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Your support means everything. Now let's go back to where this nightmare truly began. The rain was coming down in heavy, relentless sheets that October afternoon when my cell phone vibrated on my desk. I was sitting in my corner office at the structural engineering firm in downtown Chicago, staring at a highly complex set of blueprints for a new commercial high-rise. My job as a senior structural engineer is to build foundations. I calculate load-bearing walls, assess stress points, and ensure that massive structures can withstand hurricane-force winds and violent earthquakes without crumbling. It is a job that requires absolute precision and an understanding of how pressure affects a core. Ironically, the foundation of my own family was entirely rotten from the inside out, and I had been ignoring the structural warnings for years. The caller ID on my screen flashed the word, Mom. That was my very first warning sign. My mother never called me on a Tuesday afternoon. We had our obligatory Sunday afternoon check-ins, which usually consisted of her giving me an itemized list of things she needed me to pay for, or complaining extensively about the homeowners association. She treated those HOA meetings like competitive blood sports, always needing to have the best landscaping or the newest roof in the neighborhood. I picked up the phone, keeping my eyes on my blueprints. Her voice came through the speaker, and it was strangely formal. It was coated in a thick layer of artificial sweetness that immediately made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. She invited me to dinner on Friday night. Not just a casual dinner. She specifically mentioned she was making her special chicken lasagna with the homemade white garlic sauce, a dish I used to beg for when I was a kid. She had not made that specific meal in almost a decade because she claimed it took too much effort. She told me it was absolutely crucial that I be there. She framed it as a matter of significant family business. When Friday evening finally arrived, I drove my car through the familiar, tree-lined streets of Oak Park. I pulled into the pristine driveway of the two-story house where I grew up. The property was immaculate. The lawn was perfectly manicured, a service I paid for every spring. The house itself was spotless. Every surface inside gleamed with lemon polish. Expensive vanilla candles were burning in the living room, completely failing to mask the underlying, suffocating tension that I could feel the moment I crossed the threshold. My brother Julian was already there. He was sitting right in the center of the brown leather sofa like a prince awaiting a royal audience. Julian is 30 years old. He proudly and loudly calls himself an entrepreneur, yet he has never actually held a job that provided a regular salary, health benefits, or a 401k. He was wearing a designer shirt that I knew for a fact he could not afford on his non-existent income. We eventually moved to the dining room and sat down to eat. The conversation was agonizingly polite and deeply artificial. My father, Richard, asked me about my recent projects at the engineering firm. He nodded along with a blank expression as I explained my new responsibilities, though his eyes looked completely glazed over. My mother poured an expensive, heavy bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon that usually only made an appearance on major holidays. Everything felt highly staged, like we were actors reading from a poorly written script. When the dinner plates were finally cleared and replaced with thick slices of tiramisu from the expensive Italian bakery downtown, my father cleared his throat loudly. He sat up completely straight in his chair, adopting the stern, authoritative posture he used to discipline me when I was a rebellious teenager. He announced, with a heavy dose of manufactured solemnity, that they had recently met with their lawyer to officially finalize their will. The air in the dining room grew instantly heavy. I felt my stomach drop into my shoes, an instinctual, physical reaction to the massive shift in the room's energy. I looked over at Julian. He did not look surprised in the slightest. He just swirled the expensive wine in his glass, a small, arrogant, thoroughly satisfied smirk playing on his lips. He already knew. My mother folded her hands neatly on the table, looking at me with an expression of profound, sickening pity. "Thomas, dear," she began, utilizing that condescending, patronizing tone that instantly made me feel like a helpless 12-year-old boy. "After a lot of careful consideration, your father and I have officially decided to leave the Oak Park house, as well as the vacation property up in Wisconsin, entirely and exclusively to Julian." The words hung in the air, echoing violently off the dining room walls. The house I grew up in. The place where I spent countless nights studying until my eyes burned. The vacation cabin where I spent my teenage years working a grueling summer job as a local lifeguard just to help pay the annual property taxes. All of it, gone. Handed over completely to a man who could not even manage to pay his own monthly cell phone bill without asking for an extension. "You will do very well managing the properties, Julian," my father added smoothly, speaking directly to my brother as if I had already evaporated from the room entirely. "It will give you the solid financial foundation you desperately need to finally launch your new startup company." I sat there frozen, my knuckles turning stark white as I gripped the edge of the mahogany table. I slowly turned my head and looked directly at my mother. "And me?" I asked. My voice sounded hollow, distant, like it belonged to a stranger. She offered me another look of deep, patronizing sympathy. "Thomas, you have a fantastic, high-paying salary. You are a senior structural engineer. You own your own beautiful apartment downtown. You have your own independent life and your own savings. You are just too independent. Julian needs this more than you do. He is still finding his way. He is more fragile. You clearly do not need our financial help." Fragile. They were openly calling a grown, 30-year-old man fragile to justify stripping me of my rightful family inheritance. I was not just angry in that moment. I was completely, fundamentally, and irrevocably broken. It was never actually about the monetary value of the real estate. It was about what the money represented. It was the undeniable slap-in-the-face proof that in their eyes, I was not a cherished son. I was a convenient safety net. I was a disposable tool. I realized right then and there that I had spent my entire adult life trying to buy the love and approval of people who were only interested in the contents of my wallet. But they had pushed me too far, and the foundation they thought was so secure was about to collapse right on top of them. To truly comprehend the absolute audacity of what had just transpired at that dinner table, you have to understand the decades of quiet, persistent exploitation that paved the way to this moment. The glaring disparity between Julian and me was not a sudden, unexpected development. It was a slow, deliberate, and highly toxic poisoning of my entire childhood. When I was 16 years old, I spent my summer weekends hauling heavy lumber and carrying rough bricks at local commercial construction sites. My alarm went off at 5 in the morning. I came home with severely calloused hands, smelling constantly of drywall dust and dried sweat, just so I could afford to buy my own school clothes, my own textbooks, and gas money. I even had to buy my own steel-toed work boots because my parents refused to pay for them. They constantly lectured me, telling me it was vital character building. They preached that hard, physical work was the absolute cornerstone of a successful, respectable life. Meanwhile, Julian, who is exactly 4 years younger than me, spent his 16th year playing video games in the air-conditioned basement. He received a highly generous $50 weekly allowance from my parents for doing absolutely nothing beyond taking out the trash once a week. When I turned 18, my grand prize for entering adulthood was my mother handing me the keys to a rusted, 15-year-old Schwinn bicycle, so I could pedal 3 miles in the snow to my community college classes. When Julian turned 18, a brand new, shiny silver Honda Civic magically appeared in the family driveway with a massive red bow on the hood. When I questioned the blatant unfairness, my father told me I was being petty and jealous. I swallowed the intense bitterness. I told myself that they were just tougher on the oldest child. I buried myself deep in my heavy engineering textbooks, took out massive student loans, and eventually clawed my way through a rigorous engineering program. Fast forward to my professional adult life. As my career stabilized and my salary grew, my parents' financial demands escalated proportionally. It started small and seemingly innocent. A couple of $100 here to fix a broken water heater in the basement. $100 there to cover a surprisingly high winter electric bill. But very soon, it became a structured, relentless, and expected extraction of my wealth. I eventually set up an automatic bank transfer of $500 every single month to their joint checking account just to help them cover their basic living expenses, because my father complained his factory pension was simply not enough to maintain their lifestyle. I paid the $200 monthly premium for my father's expensive supplemental medical insurance. I completely funded our extravagant Thanksgiving dinners every single year. I am talking about buying the massive 20-pound organic turkey, the expensive imported wines, the artisanal cheeses, and the fresh centerpieces. Julian would inevitably show up 2 hours late, carrying a cheap, crushed bag of store-bought potato chips, eat half the expensive food, criticize the texture of my homemade stuffing, and leave early without washing a single dish. I was essentially paying a hefty monthly subscription fee just to remain a recognized member of my own biological family. The harsh reality of my situation did not fully hit me until a rainy Tuesday afternoon at the engineering firm, about a year before the disastrous inheritance dinner. I was standing in the employee break room, pouring a cup of terrible, bitter office coffee, looking at my monthly bank statements on my phone screen. My colleague, Clara, walked in. Clara is a sharp, fiercely intelligent, no-nonsense senior architect who has been my loyal ally and professional sounding board for years. She walked over, glanced over my shoulder, and caught sight of the multiple outgoing transfers highlighted in bright red on my screen. "Thomas," she said, leaning firmly against the granite counter. "Please look me in the eye and tell me that is a mortgage payment for a lucrative investment property, and not another massive cash transfer to your parents." I sighed deeply, rubbing my throbbing temples. "It is just the usual routine, Clara. The $500 for their groceries, the $200 for the supplemental insurance, and I had to cover a plumbing bill this month. It is fine. They really need the help." Clara slammed her ceramic coffee mug down on the counter with a loud crack. "No, Thomas, it is absolutely not fine. You are 34 years old. You are single-handedly funding the retirement lifestyle of 2 able-bodied adults and heavily subsidizing a 30-year-old man-child who refuses to work. You are acting like a commercial bank, and they are treating you like an endless ATM. Answer me honestly. When is the last time they called to ask how your day was without asking for cash in the exact same breath?" Her words stung fiercely because they were completely and undeniably accurate. But it was not just my parents' profound entitlement that fueled this destructive dynamic. There was a hidden, malicious architect behind my family's toxic structure. My mother's older sister, Aunt Beatrice. Aunt Beatrice was a master emotional manipulator wrapped in pastel floral cardigans and fake, sugary smiles. She played the public role of the sweet, caring, concerned aunt perfectly, but she possessed a deeply malicious and envious streak. I remember a specific, clarifying afternoon a few years prior. I had driven over to the Oak Park house on my only day off to fix a complicated leaky pipe underneath their kitchen sink, providing highly skilled, free labor, of course. They did not know I was still in the kitchen working. I could clearly hear Aunt Beatrice sitting in the adjacent living room. Her voice dropped to a hushed, conspiratorial, venomous whisper. "Eleanor, you really should not feel a single ounce of guilt about taking Thomas's money. she hissed to my mother. He is a corporate engineer. Do you have any idea the massive salary he brings in? He is practically swimming in extra cash. He buys expensive suits. But poor Julian. Oh, Julian is a fragile, creative soul. He is far too sensitive for the brutal corporate world. Thomas is deeply selfish and arrogant if he does not willingly share his wealth with his own blood. You need to fiercely protect Julian's future at all costs. I laid there on the cold linoleum floor, a heavy steel pipe wrench gripped in my hand, feeling the cold metal press hard into my palm. Selfish. I was working exhausting 60-hour weeks, completely delaying my own personal investments, paying their monthly bills, sacrificing my weekends, and I was the selfish one. The absolute worst part was discovering much later, through a mutual family friend, that Aunt Beatrice actually had a hidden financial stake in Julian's nonsense. She had foolishly invested $5,000 into one of his failed, ridiculous app startups, a premium dog walking service that never launched, and she was actively pressuring my parents to secure Julian's financial future purely so she could eventually get her own lost money back. She was a financial parasite feeding off another financial parasite. All these heavy, dark memories, all these exhausting years of quiet resentment and continuous financial bleeding, crystallized perfectly in my mind as I sat at that dining room table. They had taken my hard-earned money, my precious time, and my unwavering loyalty, and they had rewarded me by literally handing my childhood home to my brother. The fuse was lit, and the explosion was going to be spectacular. Let me take you right back to the suffocating atmosphere of that dining room, just seconds before I finally walked out. The exact moment my mother delivered the fatal, calculating blow about the inheritance. The room went completely, terrifyingly silent. My father was looking at me with a demanding, expectant expression, fully waiting for me to passively nod my head and accept my humiliating demotion like the obedient workhorse I had always been. Julian was openly smirking, already mentally measuring the windows for new drapes and calculating the resale value of the properties. I did not yell. I did not throw my plate against the wall, even though every fiber of my being wanted to. I kept my voice dangerously low, deeply controlled, and completely steady. Let me make sure I understand this exact logic, I said, locking my eyes directly onto my father's face. You are completely cutting me out of the family legacy simply because I am successful. Because I worked my hands to the bone to build a stable career while Julian sat in the basement and played video games. You are deliberately punishing me for being responsible. My mother sighed heavily, doing her absolute best impression of a long-suffering, misunderstood saint. Thomas, please do not be so dramatic and difficult. It is not a punishment at all. It is family equity. You already have everything you need to survive. Equity? I repeated slowly, tasting the bitter, metallic irony of the word on my tongue. I pushed my chair back and stood up slowly, towering over the table. If I am so completely and thoroughly independent, and if Julian is the only one who desperately requires your financial protection, then you no longer need my daily charity. Julian scoffed loudly, rolling his eyes. Charity? Come on. Bro, don't be so incredibly petty. It's just a house. I completely ignored his existence and focused entirely on my parents. The $500 I electronically send you every single month? Cancelled immediately. Dad's expensive supplemental health insurance policy? Terminated as of tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. The heavy property taxes I pay on the Wisconsin cabin every winter? Find another way to pay them. The free home repairs, the funded holidays, the emergency cash funds. It all stops. Right now. Today. My father's face instantly turned a violent, alarming shade of purple. He slammed his fist down on the table, making the silverware rattle. You cannot be serious. We are your blood family. You have a moral obligation to help us. My moral obligation officially died the exact moment you handed my childhood over to him, I stated coldly, pointing a rigid finger at Julian. Good luck funding his endless, pathetic startups on your limited factory pension, Dad. I turned my back on them, completely ignoring my mother's sudden, shrill, panicky protests, and walked straight out the front door into the freezing rain. For 3 entire weeks, I maintained an impenetrable wall of absolute silence. I blocked their phone numbers on my cell. I routed their frantic emails to a hidden spam folder. I logged into my online banking portal and derived a deep, visceral, almost intoxicating satisfaction from physically clicking the Cancel Recurring Transfer button. I called the insurance broker and ruthlessly removed my father from the expensive medical policy. Every single action felt like physically shedding a massive, suffocating weight I had been carrying on my shoulders for nearly 2 decades. I poured all my newly reclaimed mental energy and my suddenly surplus money directly into my career. Without the constant, exhausting mental drain of my family's manufactured daily crises, my professional performance absolutely skyrocketed. The CEO of our engineering firm, Mr. Sterling, a brilliant, imposing, hyperlogical man who valued concrete results above absolutely all else, noticed the immediate shift in my focus. During a major quarterly review meeting in his massive glass-walled office, he did not just offer me a handshake. He officially approved my promotion to principal engineer, and he handed me a highly lucrative profit-sharing contract that nearly doubled my annual income. I was finally receiving genuine validation and massive financial reward from a true authority figure, someone who actually rewarded hard work instead of actively punishing it. I felt completely untouchable. I was building my own empire, but the universe has a very funny, twisted way of aggressively testing your resolve when you think you have finally won. Exactly 3 weeks and 2 days after that disastrous Friday dinner, my desk phone vibrated. It was an unknown local number, but my deeply ingrained gut instinct told me exactly who was on the other end. I answered it cautiously, keeping my tone strictly professional. "Thomas, please do not hang up." It was my mother. She was not utilizing her condescending, patronizing tone. She was not using her angry, demanding tone. She was actively hyperventilating, audibly choking on her own tears. The sound was raw, stripped bare, and genuinely terrified. "Make it extremely quick," I said. My voice as cold and unforgiving as Chicago ice. "We are going to lose the house." She sobbed violently into the receiver. "The bank. They sent the final legal notice today via certified mail. Thomas, they are going to permanently foreclose on the Oak Park house. We have exactly 2 weeks to pay the balance in full, or we are thrown out on the street." I stopped breathing for a fraction of a second. The Oak Park house? My father had worked a steady union factory job his entire adult life. They had owned that specific house for over 20 years. Foreclose? What on earth are you talking about? Dad paid off the bulk of that original mortgage years ago. You own that house. A heavy, suffocating, intensely shameful silence fell over the phone line. We quietly took out a second mortgage," she whispered, the profound shame evident in her cracking, weak voice. "We refinanced the property. We owe $68,000, Thomas. All of it is due right now. The grace periods are completely over. We have terrible credit scores because of late credit card payments. Absolutely no one will give us a personal loan. $68,000. My analytical engineering mind raced at light speed, desperately trying to calculate exactly how 2 retired people living a relatively quiet suburban life could rapidly burn through that much home equity. "Where exactly did the money go, Mom? You do not take luxury European vacations. You did not remodel the kitchen or the bathrooms. Where did $68,000 vanish to?" She started to cry much harder, a pathetic, wailing sound, refusing to answer the direct question. "Tell me exactly where every penny of that money went right now, or I am permanently hanging up this phone and you can start packing your garbage bags tonight." "Julian!" she finally screamed, the name tearing violently out of her throat like a curse. It was Julian. I gripped the solid wood edge of my desk so hard my fingers ached. "Explain. Now." The absolute truth that finally spilled out of her was so deeply infuriating, so utterly, incomprehensibly pathetic, that I genuinely almost laughed out loud in my office. 2 years ago, Julian, the brilliant, aspiring entrepreneur, had decided he desperately needed to project a fake image of massive wealth to attract potential investors for his non-existent companies. So, he went out and leased a high-performance, wildly expensive sports car. A Porsche. But Julian, being the deeply irresponsible parasite he is, missed his mandatory insurance payments. When the insurance policy legally lapsed, he took the car out for a joyride and crashed the Porsche head-on into a concrete highway barrier. He completely totaled the luxury vehicle. The aggressive leasing company immediately sued him for the full retail value of the destroyed vehicle, plus massive, escalating legal fees. To keep their precious, fragile golden child out of jail and prevent his total bankruptcy, my parents had secretly, quietly remortgaged the family home. They deliberately drained the foundational equity of their own physical shelter just to pay for a totaled luxury car for a grown, 30-year-old man. And now, the catastrophic bill had finally come due. "Thomas, I am begging you on my hands and knees," my mother pleaded, her voice a wet mess. "We have absolutely nothing left. Julian has nothing. If you do not help us pay this, we will be homeless." I sat silently in my corner office, looking out at the sprawling city skyline. I thought about the rusted bicycle I rode through the freezing snow to college. I thought about the painful calluses on my teenage hands. I thought about them arrogantly handing the family inheritance to Julian at that dinner table, knowing full well they had already secretly mortgaged its entire value just to save him from his own stupidity. They were not just leaving me out of the will. They were actively, maliciously trying to pass a hollowed-out, debt-ridden shell of a legacy to Julian, desperately hoping they could eventually guilt-trip me into paying off the massive debt for him when they finally died. I did not feel a single ounce of anger anymore. I felt total, absolute, crystalline clarity. I realized in that exact moment that I held every single powerful card in the entire deck. "I will think about it," I said flatly, and ended the call without another word. I thought the worst family betrayal was over. I was so incredibly wrong. Because the ruthless financial strategy one was about to deploy was not just going to save the physical house. It was going to violently rewrite the entire power dynamic of my bloodline forever. I did not immediately call them back. I deliberately let them sweat in the agonizing, suffocating uncertainty of their impending financial ruin. Instead of rushing to their rescue like the obedient dog they thought I was, I picked up my phone and called Clara's older brother, Marcus. Marcus was a heavy-hitting, ruthless real estate broker in the greater Chicago area. A man who specialized specifically in high-yield investments, foreclosures, and distressed properties. I met Marcus for a late, quiet dinner at an upscale, dimly lit steakhouse downtown. Over dry martinis and expensive cuts of beef, I meticulously laid out the entire pathetic situation. I detailed the Oak Park house, the Wisconsin lake cabin, the hidden $68,000 debt, and the aggressively impending bank foreclosure. Marcus listened with intense focus, silently tapping his expensive silver pen against his leather-bound portfolio. When I finally finished the story, he looked at me with a sharp, highly calculating, predatory gaze. "Thomas, you are literally sitting on a real estate gold mine," he said, pulling out a yellow legal pad and starting to write rapidly. "Oak Park is one of the absolute hottest rental markets right now for young corporate professionals with families who want good school districts. That specific house, with minimal, inexpensive cosmetic upgrades like fresh paint and new carpets, could easily command $3,000 a month in pure rent. The Wisconsin cabin? That is a short-term seasonal rental dream. Put it on a vacation rental site, manage it properly, and you are easily clearing $4,000 a month during the peak summer season." He slid the yellow legal pad across the white tablecloth toward me, tapping the circled numbers. $68,000 in debt is absolute pennies compared to the massive equity still locked inside those two properties. If the bank forecloses, your parents lose absolutely everything, their credit is destroyed forever, and the bank wins the house. But if you step in and pay off the debt, you should not just be bailing them out of the goodness of your heart. You should be aggressively acquiring the assets. It was a profound, life-altering light bulb moment. I was not going to be their tragic savior anymore. I was going to be a cold, calculating real estate investor. The very next morning, I scheduled an urgent, mandatory meeting with Lawyer Vance, the ancient, distinguished, highly traditional attorney who had handled my family's legal affairs for decades. Sitting in his stuffy, mahogany-paneled office, completely surrounded by towering walls of dusty legal books, I coldly outlined my strict terms. Vance looked incredibly uncomfortable, shifting nervously in his squeaky leather chair and wiping his thick glasses repeatedly with a handkerchief. "Thomas, my boy," Vance stammered, looking at me as if I had grown a second head. "This is highly irregular and incredibly aggressive. You are actively asking to completely strip your parents of their legal ownership of their primary residence under extreme financial duress. I am generously offering to pay off a $68,000 debt that they absolutely cannot service, saving them from immediate bankruptcy and public eviction." I corrected him, leaning forward and placing my hands flat on his desk. "This is a clean, straightforward financial transaction, Mr. Vance. I want you to draft the paperwork today. Make it ironclad. I want quitclaim deeds for both properties, transferring sole, exclusive 100% ownership directly to me. Not a family trust. Not a shared deed with Julian. Mine. Completely mine." While Vance was reluctantly drafting the severe legal documents, the universe threw one last, pathetic, predictable obstacle in my path. I received a sudden text message from Chloe, Julian's incredibly bitter, manipulative ex-girlfriend. She had apparently caught wind of the massive family crisis through the local grapevine. Chloe was a nasty piece of work, a woman who always looked out for number one and loved to stir up toxic drama. Her text message read exactly like this. "I know all about the crashed Porsche, Thomas. I know your parents committed a minor form of mortgage fraud on the bank application to get that loan money for Julian. Pay me 10 grand in cash by Friday, or I call the bank manager and the local police and report the fraud." She was literally trying to blackmail me. My own useless brother's ex-girlfriend was trying to extort me for cash while my family burned to the ground. I did not panic. I did not even blink. I calmly took a high-resolution screenshot of the text message, sent it straight to my engineering firm's ruthless corporate litigator, and had him draft a terrifying, legally binding cease and desist letter. The letter explicitly outlined the severe federal and state prison penalties for criminal extortion and blackmail. I emailed a PDF of the aggressive letter to Chloe with a single, chilling sentence. "Direct all future communication to my legal counsel." She blocked my number within 5 minutes and completely vanished into the ether. The trash was efficiently taking itself out. With the heavy legal paperwork finalized by Vance and my finances perfectly aligned, I finally picked up my cell phone and called my parents' house. It had been exactly 48 torturous hours since my mother's desperate, sobbing plea for help. My father answered on the very first ring. He sounded physically exhausted, completely defeated, and incredibly old. The arrogant, dismissive patriarch from the dinner table was entirely gone. "Thomas," he rasped, his voice shaking. Please tell me you will help us. We have absolutely nowhere else to turn. The bank manager, Mr. Davis, refuses to extend the payment deadline by even a single day. We are completely ruined." I kept my voice devoid of any warmth or emotion. I spoke with the clinical, detached precision of an engineer discussing load-bearing concrete walls. "I have a permanent solution, Dad. I will wire the entire $68,000 to the bank directly from my account. I will clear the debt entirely. You will not face bank foreclosure." I heard a massive, shuddering, wet gasp of relief from the other end of the line. I heard my mother loudly crying in the background, thanking God. "Oh, thank God." My father wept openly. "Thank you, son. You are a good boy. We will immediately put you back in the will. We will split it perfectly evenly with Julian. I promise you." "No, you will not," I said smoothly, cutting through his pathetic tears like a scalpel. The phone line went dead, terrifyingly silent. "I do not want to be in the will, Dad. A will implies that I have to wait for you to pass away to receive what is rightfully mine. And a will can be secretly changed the moment I turn my back, as you have already proven. I am not giving you a personal loan. I am not giving you a gift. I am making a real estate purchase." What? What do you mean? He asked, panic rapidly replacing his brief relief. I have officially instructed Lawyer Vance to draft the necessary documents. I will pay the massive debt you incurred for Julian, but in exchange, you and Mom will sign over the deeds to both the Oak Park house and the Wisconsin cabin. 100% legal ownership transfers to me, effective immediately upon signing. My name alone will be on those properties. You cannot do that, my father exploded, his voice cracking with renewed terror. That is our home. That is Julian's inheritance. You are stealing from your own family. I am legally buying highly distressed assets at a premium price to save you from living in a homeless shelter, I replied coldly. You have exactly 24 hours to make your decision. Mr. Vance will be at your house tomorrow afternoon at exactly 3 p.m. with the legal paperwork. If you sign it, the debt vanishes forever. If you refuse to sign, I keep my money, and the bank physically evicts you on Monday morning. There will be absolutely no negotiation on these terms. I hung up the phone without waiting for a response. The steel trap was perfectly set. The storm was finally here, and they had absolutely no idea that signing those papers was only phase one of my master plan. The digital clock on the dashboard of my car flipped to exactly 2:55 in the afternoon as I finally turned onto the familiar, sprawling, tree-lined street of my childhood neighborhood. The Chicago weather had taken a brutal, aggressive turn over the last 48 hours. It was the kind of biting, unforgiving winter wind that slices right through the thickest wool coat and settles deep into your bones, aching in a way that feels almost intensely personal. The sky above Oak Park was a heavy, bruised shade of slate gray, threatening freezing rain or sleet at any given moment. It was entirely fitting, considering the absolute permanent deep freeze that was about to overtake my entire family tree. I parked my car firmly on the street, explicitly refusing to pull my vehicle into the paved driveway. I was treating this exact moment like what it truly was: a high-stakes, ruthless corporate real estate acquisition, not a warm, nostalgic family visit. I turned off the engine and sat in the quiet cabin of my car for a full minute, listening to the wind howl against the glass. I took a deep breath, centering myself, locking away any lingering shreds of familial guilt. I walked up the long concrete path leading to the front door. This was the exact same concrete path I had painstakingly shoveled free of heavy, wet snow for 15 consecutive winters while my brother Julian slept warmly inside his bedroom until noon. I did not knock on the heavy wooden door. I simply turned the brass handle, pushed the front door open, and stepped into the foyer. The atmosphere inside the living room was thick, heavy, and completely suffocating. It felt significantly less like a suburban family gathering and much more like the tense, highly volatile waiting room outside a downtown courtroom during a bitter, contested divorce settlement. My mother was sitting rigidly on the very edge of the expensive floral armchair, clutching a thoroughly shredded white tissue in her trembling, manicured hands. Her eyes were red-rimmed, swollen, and darting around the room in absolute panic. My father was pacing the entire length of the vintage oriental rug, his heavy hands clasped tightly behind his back, his face a grim mask of exhausted defeat and wounded pride. He looked like a man who had finally realized the bill for his lifetime of bad decisions had arrived. And then there was Julian. My 30-year-old brother was leaning casually against the brick fireplace mantel, his arms crossed confidently over his chest, wearing a completely unearned, infuriating look of smug satisfaction. In his deeply warped, incredibly entitled mind, this entire catastrophic financial crisis was just a minor administrative hurdle. He genuinely believed that I was simply stepping in to play my designated, lifelong role as the obedient family workhorse. He thought I was just clearing the temporary financial roadblock so he could eventually inherit the property free and clear, exactly as they had promised him at that dinner table. He had absolutely no concept of the brutal legal reality that was about to violently crash down on his head. Sitting incredibly uncomfortably on the edge of the brown leather sofa was Lawyer Vance. The elderly attorney looked like he would rather be undergoing a root canal than sitting in this living room. He had his heavy, scuffed leather briefcase open on the glass coffee table, a remarkably thick stack of legally binding documents resting perfectly aligned next to a heavy gold fountain pen. "Thomas," my father said, abruptly stopping his relentless pacing the exact moment I walked into the room. He let out a long, incredibly heavy exhale that sounded exactly like a deflating car tire. "You are finally here. Thank God. Let us get this nightmare over with." I did not offer a polite greeting. I did not take off my wool winter coat or my leather gloves. I walked directly over to the coffee table, ignoring my family entirely, and looked down at the neatly stacked documents. "Mr. Vance, are the quitclaim deeds prepared exactly as I explicitly instructed over the phone?" Lawyer Vance cleared his throat nervously, adjusting his thick, wire-rimmed glasses and refusing to make direct eye contact with my parents. "Yes, Thomas. The documents are fully drafted, comprehensive, and entirely ironclad. By signing these specific legal papers, Richard and Eleanor, you are legally, permanently transferring 100% of your ownership rights, property titles, and financial interests in both the Oak Park primary residence and the Wisconsin lakefront vacation property directly to Thomas. You are completely waiving any and all future claims to this real estate. Once the ink is dry, you are no longer the owners." My mother let out a small, pathetic, high-pitched whimper, pressing the shredded tissue hard to her mouth to muffle a sob. Julian scoffed loudly from his position at the fireplace, aggressively rolling his eyes toward the ceiling as if this was all just unnecessary, tedious legal theater keeping him from his very important day. "Come on, Thomas," Julian sneered, his voice dripping with heavy, condescending arrogance. "Do we really need to go through all this dramatic, drawn-out legal nonsense? You are paying off the bank to save the family home. We all get it. You are the big, wealthy hero. Can we just sign whatever stupid papers the lawyer brought, so I can get back to working on my new business plan?" I slowly turned my head and looked directly into Julian's eyes. I did not raise my voice a single decibel. I spoke with the terrifying, absolute calm of an impending avalanche. "You do not have a business plan, Julian. You have a massive mountain of debt, a completely totaled Porsche, and a fabricated resume. And you are not signing a single thing today because you do not own anything. You are just a spectator in my transaction." Julian's smug, arrogant smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a very brief flash of genuine, unmasked uncertainty crossing his face before he quickly masked it with defensive anger. He pushed off the brick mantle and took an aggressive step toward me. "Watch your mouth, bro. That is my rightful inheritance you are talking about. Mom and Dad promised it to me." "Not anymore," I stated coldly, turning my attention entirely back to my father, who was watching the exchange with wide eyes. "The deadline is right now, Dad. I have the wire transfer completely queued up on my banking application on my phone. The funds are ready to instantly hit the bank manager's desk and clear the account. The exact moment you and Mom physically sign those papers and Mr. Vance officially notarizes them, the $68,000 debt vanishes into thin air. The bank lawsuit goes away permanently. You are clear. But if you hesitate for even one single minute," I turn around, I walk out that front door, and the county sheriff comes with the finalized foreclosure notices on Monday morning. "You will be physically removed from the premises by armed officers." My father looked down at the thick stack of papers, then looked back up at me. His eyes were wide, filled with a desperate, unspoken, pathetic plea for mercy. He was frantically searching my face, desperately looking for the obedient, pushover son who used to hand over his hard-earned paycheck without a second thought. But that son was dead and buried. I stared back at him with the cold, calculating, dead eyes of a man who finally knew his absolute worth in the marketplace. Slowly, with a violently trembling hand, my father reached out across the glass table and picked up the heavy gold pen. He leaned over, his shoulders slumped in total defeat, and signed his name on the designated, highlighted lines. The loud scratching sound of the metal nib against the thick, crisp paper was the only noise in the entire room. He handed the pen to my mother without looking at her. She was shaking so violently I thought she might drop the pen onto the rug, but she managed to scratch out her messy signature next to his on both sets of deeds. Lawyer Vance meticulously checked the signatures, pulled his heavy metal notary stamp from his leather briefcase, and stamped the documents with a loud, definitive thud. "It is officially done," the attorney announced quietly, quickly packing the papers into his bag as if they were on fire. "The properties now belong entirely and legally to Thomas." I pulled my cell phone from my coat pocket, opened my secure banking application, and authorized the massive wire transfer. Within 30 seconds, I received the digital confirmation receipt from the commercial bank. The crippling debt was entirely wiped out. The atmosphere in the living room instantly shifted. The crushing, suffocating weight of the impending bank foreclosure evaporated from the air. My father collapsed back into his armchair, wiping a thick sheen of sweat from his forehead. My mother buried her face in her hands, openly sobbing with absolute, unadulterated relief. Julian walked over to the leather sofa and threw himself down heavily, stretching his legs out and putting his expensive sneakers right on top of the glass coffee table. "Well, man, that was incredibly stressful," Julian declared, casually lacing his fingers behind his head and letting out a loud laugh. "Good looking out, bro. I knew you wouldn't actually let the bank take my house away. Mom, dry your tears. What is for dinner? I am absolutely starving. This drama really worked up my appetite." They genuinely thought the transaction was entirely over. They honestly thought they had successfully manipulated the system again, sacrificing a tiny little bit of pride and signing some paper to maintain their exact same comfortable, subsidized lifestyle. They truly believed they could just go right back to living in my newly acquired house, entirely rent-free, while I silently shouldered the massive financial burden of their catastrophic mistakes. It was the ultimate, blinding trap of their own staggering complacency. I reached deep into the inner breast pocket of my wool coat. I pulled out a crisp, bright white, sealed legal envelope. I held it up between my index and middle finger, the stark whiteness of the paper catching the ambient light of the room. "We are absolutely not finished," I announced. My voice cut through their premature relief like a serrated surgical blade. My father looked up, his brow heavily furrowed in deep confusion. "What on earth do you mean, Thomas? The bank is paid in full. The legal papers are signed and notarized. The nightmare is over." "The foreclosure nightmare is over for you," I corrected him smoothly, stepping closer to the table. "But my aggressive management of my newly acquired real estate portfolio has just begun." I tossed the white envelope onto the glass coffee table. It landed with a soft smack exactly where the property deeds had been sitting moments before. "That is an official, legally binding 30-day notice of eviction. You have exactly 1 month from today to pack all of your personal belongings, clean the property, and completely vacate my real estate." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of profound, deafening, terrifying silence that happens immediately after a bomb detonates, right before the physical shockwave hits your chest. My mother slowly lowered her hands from her tear-stained face, staring at the white envelope as if it were a highly venomous snake poised to strike. "Eviction?" she whispered, the horrible word barely making it past her trembling lips. "Thomas, what in God's name are you saying to us?" "I am saying very clearly that I am not running a charity organization," I replied, my voice echoing loudly and firmly in the quiet room. "I just invested a massive amount of my own capital to secure this distressed asset. I already have a highly qualified, background-checked family prepared to sign an ironclad 2-year lease on this house at $3,000 a month. They are physically moving their furniture in on the 1st of next month." Julian sprang up from the leather sofa like he had been electrocuted, his face contorted with absolute, unhinged, violent rage. "You cannot do that. Are you insane? This is our home. You cannot kick our own parents out onto the freezing street. You are a sick, twisted monster." I turned slowly to face Julian, feeling a deep, dark, incredibly satisfying sense of pure victory wash over me. "I am not kicking them out onto the freezing street, Julian. I generously gave them 30 days to secure a new, affordable apartment. And let us be perfectly crystal clear about the reality of this situation. If I did not step in today and wire my own money, The commercial bank was going to kick you all out on Monday morning with zero notice, escorted by police with permanently ruined credit. I actually gave you a 30-day extension to pack your bags. My father stood up rapidly, his fists clenched tightly at his sides, his face turning red. Thomas, you lied to us. You tricked us into signing those papers. I did not lie about a single solitary thing. I shot back, my voice finally rising in volume to match his anger. I explicitly told you I was buying the house. I told you I demanded the deed. You signed it completely willingly to save yourselves from bankruptcy. You just automatically, arrogantly assumed that I would let you continue living here for free because you are so incredibly used to bleeding my bank accounts dry. If I am not worthy of the family inheritance because I am too independent, then you are certainly not worthy of living in my premium investment property because you are too dependent. Get out of my house. I thought the explosion of anger was at its peak. But the real storm was just about to walk through the front door. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far, you're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. The explosion of raw, unfiltered, chaotic anger in that living room was something I will remember vividly for the rest of my natural life. Julian was screaming wildly at the top of his lungs, violently kicking the heavy glass coffee table and cursing my name with every vile word he could think of. My mother was wailing hysterically, clutching her chest and collapsing back into the armchair. Acting like this was a literal, physical funeral and someone had just died. My father was pointing a violently trembling finger inches from my face, threatening to drag me to the Supreme Court, threatening to sue me for extreme fraud and elder abuse, threatening to completely and publicly disown me. You already disowned me at that dinner table weeks ago, I shouted over the deafening chaos, my voice booming with a lifetime of heavily repressed authority and justified fury. You happily handed this house to him. Well, he crashed a leased Porsche he couldn't afford, and he lost the house. I bought it back with my own money. It belongs to me, and you are officially my tenants holding a notice to vacate. Before my father could launch into another desperate, red-faced tirade, the heavy wooden front door violently swung open, slamming hard against the interior wall. The freezing cold Chicago wind rushed into the hallway, followed immediately by the suffocating, overpowering scent of cheap floral perfume and hairspray. It was Aunt Beatrice. She marched aggressively into the living room, wearing a heavy, ostentatious faux fur winter coat and her trademark, highly exaggerated expression of extreme, busybody concern. She had clearly been sitting and waiting in her sedan parked just down the street, eagerly monitoring the house, ready to rush in and play the benevolent family peacekeeper the exact moment she assumed the terrible bank business was concluded. She took one rapid look at my weeping mother, my screaming brother, and my enraged father, and she immediately zeroed her sights entirely on me. Thomas Richard, Aunt Beatrice gasped incredibly loudly, pressing a gloved hand to her chest in a display of highly dramatic, theatrical, sickening shock. What on earth are you doing to your poor, suffering family? I could hear the terrible screaming all the way from the driveway. Have you completely lost your mind? Are you trying to give your father a heart attack? She rushed over to my mother, wrapping a comforting, suffocating arm around her shaking shoulders while shooting me a look of pure, unadulterated, toxic venom. Eleanor, my sweet sister, what did he do? Tell me what this ungrateful, cruel boy did to you. My father pointed a shaking hand at the stark white envelope resting on the coffee table. He made us sign over the deed to save the house from the bank, Beatrice. And the very second we signed it, the second the ink was dry, he handed us an official eviction notice. He is throwing us out, Beatrice. He is throwing his own flesh and blood out of our home so he can rent it to strangers. Aunt Beatrice gasped again, her eyes widening in mock, exaggerated horror. She turned to fully face me, her features twisting into a repulsive mask of righteous indignation. Thomas, You are a cold, calculated, deeply heartless creature. I always knew there was something wrong with you. After everything your parents did for you, after they fed you, clothed you, and put a safe roof over your head for 18 years, you have a massive engineering salary. You have plenty of money. You should be utterly ashamed of yourself for treating your loving family like a cold corporate transaction. Julian desperately needs this house to get back on his feet. I stood there, perfectly still, looking at this woman. This manipulative, greedy, incredibly toxic parasite who had spent years systematically poisoning my parents' minds against me, feeding their worst instincts. I felt a cold, highly calculating, almost predatory smile slowly spread across my face. It was finally time to pull the final pin on the grenade I had been holding on to. You know, Beatrice, I said, my tone incredibly casual, relaxed, and completely contrasting the intense hysteria in the room. I am really, genuinely glad you decided to show up today. Your timing is absolutely impeccable. Because I actually brought a few extra, highly interesting legal documents with me that I think my father would be very interested in reading before I leave. I reached deep into my coat pocket one last time and pulled out a thick, neatly folded, heavy stack of printed legal and financial papers. I had asked my firm's corporate litigator to do a deep, comprehensive, forensic background dive into Julian's failed business ventures immediately after Chloe tried to blackmail me. I wanted to know exactly where every dollar of that Porsche money and his startup funds had actually come from. What the brilliant lawyers found was an absolute, undeniable goldmine of internal family betrayal. I unfolded the thick stack of papers and held them up in the air. Dad, Mom, you secretly mortgaged this house to pay for Julian's crashed Porsche because you thought it was a tragic, unavoidable accident. You thought he was just a struggling, earnest entrepreneur who made a youthful mistake. But did you ever stop and wonder exactly why Aunt Beatrice was always so incredibly, aggressively supportive of Julian's ridiculous business ideas? Did you ever wonder why she constantly, relentlessly whispered in your ear, telling you to cut me out of the inheritance to protect him? Aunt Beatrice's face suddenly went completely, terrifyingly pale. All the blood drained from her cheeks. The fake, righteous anger evaporated into thin air, replaced instantly by genuine, stark, wide-eyed terror. She quickly let go of my mother's shoulders and took a rapid step backward, distancing herself. Thomas, do not be absolutely ridiculous. This is a private, sensitive family matter. Do not drag me into your cruel, vindictive games. You dragged yourself in years ago when you decided to play financial advisor with my money. I snapped, my voice cracking like a whip. I turned directly to my father and shoved the stack of papers into his chest. Read the highlighted sections, Dad. Read them right now. These are the official state corporate registration documents and the certified financial ledgers for Julian's last 3 failed startup companies. The premium dog walking app that never launched, the organic energy drink brand that failed health inspections, and the fake cryptocurrency consulting firm. My father, deeply confused and disoriented by the sudden shift in focus, took the heavy papers. He pulled his reading glasses from his shirt pocket with trembling fingers and started scanning the pages. Julian suddenly went incredibly, unnervingly quiet, his eyes darting frantically toward the front door as if calculating his chances of escaping the room before the bomb detonated. Look closely at the registered list of initial seed investors, I instructed my father, pointing at the page. My father's tired eyes tracked slowly across the printed page. He stopped abruptly. He blinked rapidly, pulled the glasses down slightly to rub his eyes, and read the specific line again to ensure he wasn't hallucinating. He looked up, his face a picture of absolute, unadulterated, world-shattering shock. Beatrice? You invested $25,000 into these fake companies. My mother gasped loudly, turning to look at her sister with total disbelief. You explicitly told us you were completely broke. You told us you could not help us with the mortgage payment because you had absolutely no savings left from your divorce. Oh, it gets much, much better, Mom. I continued relentlessly, showing absolutely no mercy. Turn to the second page, Dad. Look at the legal corporate structure they filed. My father flipped the page, the paper crinkling loudly in the tense silence. His hands were shaking again, but this time it was absolutely not from fear. It was from pure, radiating, white-hot fury. Beatrice is legally listed as a 40% equity partner. She held a priority lien against Julian's future personal assets. Exactly, I said, my voice echoing with crushing finality in the living room. Aunt Beatrice did not want you to give Julian the Oak Park house and the Wisconsin cabin because she cared deeply about his fragile, creative soul. She actively, deliberately convinced you to cut me out of the will, and she actively convinced you to give Julian absolutely everything, because Julian secretly owed her $25,000. She knew for a fact that the only way she would ever get her lost money back from his catastrophic failures was if Julian suddenly, magically owned hundreds of thousands of dollars in liquid real estate. She was using you, Dad. She manipulated you into betraying your own son so she could secure her own terrible investment. You sold me out for a woman who was actively conning you. The silence in the room was absolute. It was suffocating, heavy, and completely toxic. My father slowly lowered the stack of papers to his side. He turned his head very slowly and looked directly at Aunt Beatrice. The look in his eyes was absolutely terrifying. It was the devastating look of a man who realized he had literally burned down his entire life, destroyed his relationship with his only successful son, all for a pathetic, greedy lie. Richard, please, you have to understand, Aunt Beatrice stammered, holding her hands up defensively, backing toward the hallway. It was just business. I was trying to help the boy learn financial responsibility. You know exactly how Thomas is. He is too independent. He is arrogant. He does not need the money. Get out, my father growled. The guttural sound originated deep in his chest, like an angry animal. Eleanor, tell him. Please make him understand, Beatrice pleaded, looking desperately at my mother for backup. Get out of my house, my father roared at the top of his lungs, his booming voice literally shaking the glass in the windows. You poisoned my entire family. You convinced me to cut my own flesh and blood out of his legacy so you could line your own greedy pockets. Get out before I physically throw you out into the street. Aunt Beatrice scrambled backward in absolute panic, grabbing her purse from the credenza and practically running out the front door, slamming it shut so hard the walls vibrated. Julian was staring intensely at the floorboards, absolutely terrified to look our father in the eye. My mother was weeping silently into her hands, completely and utterly broken by the massive revelation of betrayal. I looked at the three of them standing amidst the ruins of their own making. The grand illusion of the perfect, loving, supportive family was entirely shattered, reduced to nothing but dust and ash on the hardwood floorboards. They had willingly chosen to listen to the toxic whispers of a greedy manipulator instead of judging me by my decades of loyal, unquestioning actions. You made your choices, I said quietly, the intense anger completely draining out of my body, leaving behind only a cold, hard, unbreakable resolve. You treated me like a college fund, an insurance policy, and a disposable ATM. You treated Julian like a king. Now you have the absolute truth. You have exactly 30 days to vacate my property. Do not contact me for a deadline extension. Do not call my office. The county police will handle the physical eviction if you are not gone by the 1st of the month. I turned my back on my biological family, walked out the front door, and stepped out into the freezing, biting Chicago wind. I took a deep breath of the icy air. I felt lighter than I had in my entire life. The subsequent 30 days were a brutally harsh, undeniable, and completely unforgiving reality check for my family. Without my automatic monthly financial subsidies padding their accounts, and facing the immediate, terrifying, legally binding reality of a police eviction, they were finally forced to exist in the real world, a world where actions have severe consequences. I monitored the entire situation strictly from a safe distance, utilizing Lawyer Vance as an official intermediary to ensure they did not maliciously damage the property or strip the copper wire before leaving. The physical move itself was a humiliating, highly public spectacle for them. because they had absolutely zero liquid savings left and utterly terrible credit scores due to the massive hidden debt. They could not secure a lease anywhere near the affluent, safe, tree-lined neighborhood of Oak Park. They were brutally rejected by dozens of landlords. Eventually, they were forced to rent a cramped, outdated, heavily worn two-bedroom apartment in Cicero, a significantly lower-income neighborhood located directly next to the noisy industrial rail yards. To afford the mandatory first and last month's rent plus the security deposit required by the Cicero landlord, they had to host a massive, embarrassing estate sale right on the front lawn of the Oak Park house. I drove past once on a Saturday morning, my windows tinted, completely unnoticed in my car. I sat parked down the block and watched my parents haggling with strangers over their expensive antique furniture. I watched them sell off my mother's prized fine china, my father's golf clubs, and, most poetically, the very mahogany dining room table where they had proudly, arrogantly announced my disinheritance. Watching strangers haul that table away in a pickup truck was a profound moment of closure. But the most spectacular, deeply satisfying downfall belonged exclusively to Julian. Without the luxurious Oak Park house to live in entirely for free, and with my parents' limited factory pension stretched to the absolute breaking point just to cover the cheap rent and utilities in Cicero, Julian was finally permanently cut off from the endless gravy train. There was no extra room in the Cicero apartment for his gaming setup. He could no longer sit in a finished basement and pretend to be an elite entrepreneur. He was faced with the very real, immediate threat of homelessness and starvation. Forced into a tight corner by the basic human instinct for survival, Julian had to abandon his massive, unearned ego. He actively applied for dozens of corporate jobs and was routinely, laughably rejected because his resume was a fictionalized joke filled with failed, unregistered LLCs. Eventually, the manager of a local, run-down, incredibly gritty gym in a bad part of town took pity on him. The golden child, the fragile soul who was supposed to inherit hundreds of thousands of dollars in prime real estate, was hired as a minimum-wage sanitation worker. He spent his long, grueling days wiping down sweaty weight benches, plunging clogged toilets, mopping the grimy locker room floors, and handing out clean towels to people who didn't even look at him. He was 30 years old, taking harsh orders from 20-year-old college students, finally learning the brutal, exhausting value of a single hard-earned dollar. While their comfortable world collapsed into necessary chaos, my world rapidly and exponentially expanded. Exactly on the 31st day, I took physical, legal possession of the Oak Park house. The locks were changed immediately. I brought in a professional contracting crew. We painted the dated walls a modern, clean, neutral gray, ripped out the old, stained carpets, and professionally polished the original hardwood floors until they shined like glass. Less than 2 weeks later, the Mitchell family moved in. They were a wonderful, hardworking, dual-income couple with 2 young, polite daughters. They treated the house with genuine respect and gratitude, something my own flesh and blood had never bothered to do. The Wisconsin cabin underwent a similar, highly profitable transformation. I hired a local, aggressive property management company to run it exclusively as a short-term vacation rental. Because of the prime, highly sought-after lakefront location and some modern aesthetic upgrades I funded, it was booked solid throughout the entire peak summer season, generating premium nightly rates. The financial return was absolutely staggering. Between my massive, newly increased salary as a principal engineer at the firm and the lucrative, consistent passive income actively streaming in from the 2 properties, my bank account swelled to numbers I had never seen. I did not waste the capital on flashy cars or expensive watches. I used the robust cash flow and my impeccable, pristine credit score to secure a commercial mortgage. I purchased my 3rd property, a large multifamily duplex in a rapidly gentrifying neighborhood near the city center, and immediately rented both updated units to young professionals. I was no longer just an engineer calculating structural loads. I was building a tangible, resilient, highly profitable real estate empire. I had successfully, methodically transformed the ultimate familial betrayal, the worst moment of my life, into the foundational bedrock of my total financial independence. I had cut the massive dead weight that was holding me down, and I was finally soaring higher than I ever thought possible. 3 complete, highly transformative years passed since the cold day I handed them that white eviction envelope. Time is a remarkable, highly efficient emotional filter. It strips away the blinding, chaotic heat of immediate anger and leaves behind only the cold, hard, undeniable truths of reality. I was now 37 years old. I officially owned and managed 6 highly profitable residential properties across the greater Chicago area, creating a massive portfolio of wealth. I had officially stepped back from the grinding, exhausting 60-hour work weeks at the engineering firm, transitioning smoothly into a highly paid, specialized consulting role that allowed me to dictate my own hours and focus primarily on expanding my real estate investments. I was wealthy, I was incredibly healthy, and most importantly, I was entirely at peace with the silence in my life. My parents had quietly, inevitably adapted to their new, highly restricted reality in Cicero. The harsh, abrupt transition had aged them significantly, adding deep lines to their faces and a stoop to their posture. But it had also forcibly humbled them. About 2 years into the strict estrangement, I received a handwritten letter in the mail. It was from my mother. It was not a demand for cash. It was not a manipulative guilt trip engineered by Aunt Beatrice, who had completely vanished from their lives the moment the money dried up. It was a raw, deeply painful, profoundly sincere apology letter. She admitted in shaky handwriting that they had taken me completely for granted for decades. She admitted that they had been entirely blinded by their desperate desire to coddle Julian and protect him from the world, and that they had committed a terrible, unforgivable injustice against me. I read the letter twice, sitting quietly in my office. I folded it neatly, placed it in a desk drawer, and closed it. I forgave her in my heart, freeing myself from the heavy, lingering resentment that had poisoned my youth, but I did not invite them back into my life. Forgiveness does not require reconciliation. A repaired bridge can still lead you straight back into a highly dangerous neighborhood. The most surprising, genuinely shocking development, however, came from Julian. On a crisp Tuesday morning, I was sitting in a local downtown coffee shop, reviewing a complex commercial lease agreement on my laptop while drinking a black coffee. A tall shadow fell over my table, blocking the sunlight. I looked up and saw my brother standing there. He looked entirely different. The arrogant, smug, entitled smirk was completely gone. He was wearing a simple, clean, perfectly ironed uniform polo shirt with the logo of a large, highly respected regional fitness chain. His hands looked rough and calloused. His posture was straight and confident, and there was a quiet, grounded maturity in his eyes that I had absolutely never witnessed before. "Thomas," he said quietly, gripping the back of the empty chair opposite me. "Do you have 5 minutes for me?" I studied his face for a moment, looking for the old manipulation, but found none. I closed my laptop slowly. "Sit down, Julian." He ordered a black coffee, paying for it himself with a debit card, and sat across from me. He looked down at his calloused hands for a long moment before speaking. "I am the general manager of the Southside branch now," he said, not bragging, just stating a concrete fact. "I manage a staff of 30 employees. I balance the weekly payroll. I work 50 hours a week, every single week." "Congratulations," I said honestly, leaning back. "That is a real, tangible achievement." Julian looked up, meeting my eyes directly for the first time in years. "I hated you for the first year, Thomas. I hated you with a burning passion I did not know existed. When I was scrubbing filthy toilets at minimum wage, plunging drains, and getting yelled at by teenagers, I blamed you for entirely destroying my perfect life." He took a deep, shuddering breath. "But I realized something a few months ago when I got my promotion and signed the lease for my very own, independent apartment. You did not destroy my life, Thomas. You actually saved it." I leaned forward in my chair, genuinely surprised and moved by the profound self-awareness coming from a man I thought was a lost cause. "Mom and Dad were actively drowning me," Julian continued, his voice thick with heavy emotion. "They were loving me to death, as long as they kept paying my bills, hiding my mistakes, and telling me I was a misunderstood genius. I was never going to achieve a single thing. I was going to be a pathetic 50-year-old man living in their basement, waiting for them to die so I could inherit a house I did not earn. You kicking us out. You forcing me to face the brutal, unforgiving reality of the real world. It was the most truthful, necessary, loving thing anyone has ever done for me. You forced me to grow up. So, I just wanted to look you in the eye, man to man, and say thank you. We talked for 20 minutes. It was the first genuinely honest, authentic, adult conversation we had ever shared in our entire lives. When he finally stood up to leave to go back to his job, we shook hands. It was a firm, respectful, equal handshake between two independent men. I walked out of the coffee shop into the bright, warm Chicago sunshine, feeling a profound, overwhelming sense of closure. Sometimes, the absolute greatest, most profound act of love you can offer your family is refusing to participate in their toxicity. Establishing ironclad boundaries is often viewed as incredibly cruel by those who benefit greatly from your lack of them. They will call you selfish, they will call you cold, and they will try to guilt you into submission using the concept of family obligation. But saving yourself is never a crime. I had to willingly become the villain in their heavily distorted narrative to finally become the undeniable hero of my own life. And in doing so, I accidentally gave them the ultimate priceless gift: true accountability. Have you ever faced something incredibly similar with your own family? Have you ever had to draw a hard, unforgiving line to protect your own future and your own sanity? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey.